Somalilanders will often remind you the country was in the past an independent country, fully recognized by the international community, including the United Nations. But this period lasted less than a week. On 26th June 1960, Somaliland became fully independent from British rule. Its independence recognized by 35 countries around the world, including the United States. The next day, its new parliament passed a new law approving a union with the South. On 1st July, Somalia became independent from Italy, and the two were joined together. This is a decision Somaliland has bitterly regretted ever since. Difficulties emerged almost immediately, and just a year after independence, voters in the north rejected a new constitution. The marriage was off to a rocky start, and their interests have never been aligned since. On 18th May 1991, Somaliland proclaimed that the region was re-establishing its independence, severing ties to the south. This slow and steady process of state formation in the north would be almost entirely overshadowed in the international media by the chaos engulfing the south, particularly after an international intervention 2 years later led to the infamous Black Hawk Down incident, where American troops lost their lives. Although it's true that Somaliland voluntarily erased the border with Somalia in 1960, Somaliland doesn't consider that decision irreversible. As Somalilanders often point out, theirs wouldn't be the first country to back out of a post-colonial merger. Senegal and the Gambia were joined together as the Confederation of Senegambia between 1982 to 1989. Egypt and Syria were briefly joined together as the United Arab Republic from 1958 until 1961, when Syria seceded. If these countries couldn't make their marriages work, why, Somaliland asks, should Somaliland be stuck in a loveless alliance? Let me know what you think in the comments. Unusual travel experiences are nothing new nowadays. Some are becoming so common, their mystique is losing its luster. North Korea? Thousands have already been there and done that. Tibet? Not a big deal anymore. What about Bhutan? Not so secretive anymore. But visiting a country that doesn't even exist, now that would be special. Now, I'm not talking about fictional places like the lost city of Atlantis or King Arthur's Camelot, but actual places here on Earth. There are at least 15 countries across the world with varied degrees of recognition thanks to geopolitics, but the one I'd like us to explore today is, for all intents and purposes, an internationally isolated state. Its very existence is not even acknowledged, making it the least recognized country on the planet. Not a single other country or a UN member state has ever recognized it as an official country. I'm sure by now you can guess I'm talking about Somaliland. Now imagine you're a thrill seeker, you have an insatiable need for bragging rights, and you have already visited every country in the world. You come across this video on YouTube and Somaliland blows you away. The intrigue keeps building and you can't wait to make the trip. Not just because it doesn't officially exist, but also you can't wait to answer the so many questions running in your mind about this fancied place. Eventually, you land at Egal International Airport in Hargeisa, the capital of Somaliland. A customs officer in a Somaliland uniform checks your visa, issued by the Somaliland Consulate in Washington, D.C. Still at the airport, you're pleasantly surprised to see the Somaliland flag. Still mesmerized, you hail a taxi to drop you at your hotel. All the cars on the streets have Somaliland plates. and on your way, you see Somaliland Parliament buildings and government offices. Oh, and you realize you have to use Somaliland shillings to pay for your ride. Stunned that the place has all the trappings of countryhood, things just don't add up. According to the U.S. Department of State, the United Nations, the African Union, and every other government on earth, you are not in Somaliland, a developing, stable, and mostly functional country. You are in Somalia. Somaliland is about the size of England and Wales, with an area of 137,000 square kilometers. It is part of Somalia and the larger Horn of Africa region that has hundreds of miles of coastline along the Gulf of Aden to the north. It shares borders with the Republic of Djibouti to the west, Ethiopia to the south, and Puntland, a semi-autonomous state of Somalia, lies in the east. The country enjoys relative peace and prosperity and has held previous democratic elections, but international relation analysts fear that international recognition of Somaliland would open a Pandora's box of many other secession claims in Africa, such as Morocco's Western Sahara, to demand the same. Since the creation of the African Union in 1963, there have only been two widely recognized border changes on the continent: Eritrea's split from Ethiopia in 1993 and South Sudan's independence in 2011 from Sudan, making it the world's newest nation. In short, the African Union generally always opposes secessions in a bid to avoid political instability. The issue of secession first arose in the 1960s with the wave of decolonization and questions over the viability of the newly independent states across the continent. Two cases stood out: the Congo, where Katanga's self-proclaimed breakaway was defeated by the United Nations forces, and Nigeria, where the Biafran secession was put to a stop by the Nigerian Federal Forces. Somaliland's calls to be recognized as independent rather than being included in the efforts to rebuild Somalia is an example. When South Sudan became independent in 2011, a Somaliland delegation arrived in the capital Juba, wearing t-shirts saying, "Somaliland Next." Even so, you see, even among unrecognized countries, Somaliland's case is quite unique. It is both completely independent and politically isolated at the same time. Unlike newly independent countries, Somaliland's claim for countryhood is based not on a redrawing of colonial borders, but an extremely rare attempt to re-establish them. Unlike Taiwan, Somaliland is attached not to a richer, more powerful country, in Taiwan's case China, but to a less developed, less stable one. Unlike Palestine, Somaliland's quest for independence is not a globally popular cause for activists to rally around. Often forgotten in the fast-paced international news cycle, Somaliland has become accustomed to flying solo. Why? Well, gaining international recognition is by far the most difficult step in a country that wants to be regarded as one. Despite having a territory, a government, a people, a currency and a passport, a lack of recognition is Somaliland's Achilles heel, and the country is in a state of limbo. This means that it's an entity that started to act like a real country, with the hope of eventually becoming one. What separates real from self-proclaimed countries is simply the recognition of other countries. The difference in the Somalilands of the world from, say, Germany is that Germany is recognized by its peers. Somaliland's history as a distinct region of Somalia dates back to the late 1800s. The territory was a British protectorate until 1960, when it unified with the rest of present-day Somalia, which had been under Italian rule. The merger faced challenges early on, with many in Somaliland rejecting the centralization of power in the country's south. It broke away from Somalia and declared independence in 1991. Back in the late 19th century, Britain with the support of Italy and France with the support of Russia were locked in a struggle for control of the Nile. As a means of countering French influence in the region and ensuring a regular supply of mutton for its garrison at the neighboring Yemeni port city of Aden, Britain signed a series of agreements with tribes in northern Somalia. You see, just from the names, Somaliland and Somalia, there is little ethnic or linguistic difference between these two areas. British journalists at the time reported that Somaliland was one of Britain's least rewarding possessions in Africa. Therefore, it was left mostly to govern itself through existing clan structure. Italy, on the other hand, considered Somalia an integral part of its short-lived ambitions to build a North African empire that also included modern-day Libya and parts of Egypt. It's not surprising that today the territory where the colonizing power had more ambitious state-building goals is the more unstable. This could be evidence that supports the notion that post-colonial countries where colonizers had a lighter touch turned out better in the long term than countries where colonizers were deeply involved. Since Somaliland's declaration of independence, limited opportunities for foreign trade and investment have stifled the government's capacity to provide services to its approximately 6 million residents. The breakaway nation has been a tough sell to investors, and with a gross domestic product of about $2 billion, its main export is livestock, which it ships to neighboring Djibouti and Ethiopia, as well as to Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia and Oman. Meanwhile, the government is ineligible for loans from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund as long as it is not an internationally recognized state. However, this inability to access foreign aid has been argued by pundits to be a blessing in disguise, since Somaliland has no debt as a result, adding to its narrative of self-reliance. The country's national budget is around $350 million, funded completely by its own resources. Remittances from its diaspora community prop up the economy to the tune of about $1 billion per year. Somalia, meanwhile, continues to claim Somaliland as just an autonomous province of Somalia, similar to how Serbia continues to claim Kosovo or how Georgia continues to claim South Ossetia. Mogadishu has rejected the calls for independence, and Somali President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed has been pushing to renew unity talks, which stalled in 2015. However, Somaliland on its part remains steadfast in its ambition. While they are open to collaborating with Somalia on issues such as counter-terrorism and food security, their position is that the two must agree to recognize each other as independent African states. Somalilanders will often remind you the country was in the past an independent country, fully recognized by the international community, including the United Nations. But this period lasted less than a week. On 26 June 1960, Somaliland became fully independent from British rule. Its independence recognized by 35 countries around the world, including the United States. The next day, its new parliament passed a new law approving a union with the South. On 1st July, Somalia became independent from Italy, and the two were joined together. This is a decision Somaliland has bitterly regretted ever since. Difficulties emerged almost immediately, and just a year after independence, voters in the north rejected a new constitution. The marriage was off to a rocky start, and their interests have never been aligned since. On 18th May 1991, Somaliland proclaimed that the region was re-establishing its independence, severing ties to the south. This slow and steady process of state formation in the north would be almost entirely overshadowed in the international media by the chaos engulfing the south, particularly after an international intervention 2 years later led to the infamous Black Hawk Down incident where American troops lost their lives. Although it's true that Somaliland voluntarily erased the border with Somalia in 1960, Somaliland doesn't consider that decision irreversible. As Somalilanders often point out, theirs wouldn't be the first country to back out of a post-colonial merger. Senegal and the Gambia were joined together as the Confederation of Senegambia between 1982 to 1989. Egypt and Syria were briefly joined together as the United Arab Republic from 1958 until 1961, when Syria seceded. If these countries couldn't make their marriages work, why, Somaliland asks, should Somaliland be stuck in a loveless alliance? Let me know what you think in the comments. There is no one definition to what makes something a country. What decides if a country is a country essentially is whether or not other countries agree that the country is indeed a country. For this reason, there are various counts of the number of countries in the world. The United Nations puts the number at 193 members. The Olympics Committee lists 206 member countries, and all in all, there are at least 258 national flags in the world today. A complicating factor in setting up a country is the fact that for one territory to become a new state, another already existing sovereign state must lose some of its territory. Recognition of a new state essentially means legally recognizing the transfer of sovereignty over a territory from one authority to another. An international body, including the United Nations, cannot just take away territory without permission of the original host state. Kosovo, for example, declared independence from Serbia in 2008, but even to this day, it doesn't have sovereign statehood, despite more than half of the United Nations member states recognizing its independence. This is largely because Serbia still claims sovereign control over the territory, although other factors are certainly also at play. In the same way, Iraq would have to relinquish sovereign control over territory in order for Kurdistan to become a country. In the last 25 years, more than 24 new countries have been recognized by the international community, and dozens more separatist groups continue to seek independence around the world. But, judging from Somaliland's story, secession isn't as easy as it seems. Chances are, Somaliland will continue to exist as a country that does not officially exist.